welcome everyone to the launch of Kanplexity, Kanban for Complexity. I'd love to get messages from you in terms of where you were today, which part of the world are you watching from, and maybe what kind of domain are you working in. You can comment on whichever social media channel you're coming through, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, or even Twitch. And we're going to be talking today about Kanplexity, which is a new approach for Agile and non-software. So let me get started. The first time I used Kanplexity was in 2019. Hi Chris from London and Financial Services, thank you. Encouraging others to do the same. Which part of the world are you from? I started using Kanplexity in 2019, and I had a team that had really skilled people doing complex work, and they couldn't get work done in 30 days. It was, hi Matthew from Margate. I know Matthew, how are you doing? And it was a real problem because they were very good people, very good individually. Also, I would say that the individuals, a lot of them would have had PhDs or maybe double PhDs and published papers in journals and stuff like that. So really capable people. And how could I help them to be agile, basically, to help them not just to be agile, but to help them to solve the problem that they had in front of them. A really complex problem, not just on the liminal between complicated and complex, we'll talk about that later, but really deeply complex. And so in essence what we did was we had somebody who was essentially acting as a guide, kind of like an agile leader, backstage leader, showing the right behaviors as an agile leader and so on, and a really capable team. And I was looking for some options that would work for them. Hi Jocko from New York City. Hi Jill in the Big Old Banks, very good. Hi Andrew, how are you doing? From County Antrim, Digital Product Manager, welcome. So yeah, there was, what do I do? It was non-software. Now one of the first things that I realized is that as a person who came from software originally, I was originally a programmer. We used to call software developers programmers in my day, and I was terrible, so I was lucky for everyone that I'm not one of those people anymore. But I did come from that background, and I was aware that maybe people would dismiss what I was saying because you're just talking about software and you don't know what we're doing and all that. And actually, a lot of the time they're right. I don't know what they're doing, so if they have their PhDs and all that kind of stuff, well, what am I going to do if I've got qualifications in a completely different area? So what I did was I learned to really be humble about admitting that I didn't know anything about their field of work. And I would obviously do some self-study and all that kind of stuff, but really I probably needed some help. I probably needed people to teach me actually how to do things in their world, and people were kind enough to spend 45 minutes at a time, a few people on a team basically teaching me so that if I was going to present some options, that those options would be suitable. And if say there were 10 options on a normal menu, maybe after I understood the work a bit more, maybe I realized, okay, maybe there's only 2 options here. So in that particular case, the 2 options that were left were Scrum and Kanban. And I'm a Scrum trainer as well, and I love Scrum. Hi Hamza from London, I know Hamza as well. And I know Scrum very well. But one of the things I don't like doing is faking it. I don't mean like just faking it, but really doing something that it's not really designed to do. Hi Christian, Agile coach in Sweden, welcome. And I didn't want to break it. I didn't want to have a team doing like, I don't know, 4 month sprints, you know what I mean? And meeting every day, and obviously we don't have the 3 questions anymore, and there were only ever suggestions and so on. But Scrum didn't seem to be a fit, and also the Scrum values didn't seem to fit the team either. A lot of people say, well, the Scrum values are really good, and they are very good, but don't we all have our own personal values? And what I sensed was the personal values of the individuals in the team were slightly different to what you might have in the Scrum values. So I thought I'd roll out a Kanban simulation. And hi, is David Crow as well, saying hello to Matthew. So yeah, I said a roll out a simulation. I can't remember which one I did, because it was back in the old days when we were actually all meeting each other. Not half of us in the office and half of us online. Everybody was in the office, and we did some simulations. I did come across some issues in that there were actually some real walls. Sometimes as change leaders, what can happen is we end up kind of thinking that people are just objecting, but actually sometimes, as one of my colleagues told me in Switzerland a few months ago, sometimes there's a real wall. And if you understood the work, actually, you know what the wall was, and there might be a few of them. So sometimes we're a little bit too dismissive about, people are just resisting. Maybe they're not resisting. Maybe there's a real wall there. So that's how it all started. And believe it or not, I wrote a guide in 2019. I published it. It was very long. It was a good effort, I guess. But I kind of withdrew it because I got involved in Kanban Guide then. So Kanban Guide is on kanbanguides.org. And it's hi Mike Levings, seen you before on these live streams, welcome. Hi Ingrid, very good, from Brazil. Hey, from Brazil, fantastic, thank you. So yeah, I was saying, okay, what do I do? Because I can use Kanban then, but Kanban Guide didn't exist at that stage. You see, this was 2019, right? We published it in 2020. So what will I do? And so I essentially essentially there was a guide, and there was a team, and not just Kanban system members, but a team that really trusted each other, that was retrospecting together and really kind of getting better as they went along. And I learned since then, actually, from the EU field guide on dealing with complexity in a crisis, that actually you can also have a crew as well. You don't have to have a team. So in 2022 we have the crew in addition. And I used Cynefin at the time as a kind of a sense-making compass, for want of a better expression. And what we did was, we found a way to move forward. And we initially were having kind of reviews after maybe 5 or 6 weeks, and we changed the time that we had the session to when it suited the stakeholders. We weren't absolutely clockwork on our rhythm. We were kind of ballpark 5 or 6 weeks, and we were sending out pre-read, and that worked really well, and not too much effort in the pre-read. People actually read the pre-read, so we were actually having real discussions. What Michael Koosters would call a Steve Jobs style sprint review, kind of like I was still calling them sprints at that stage. I think sprints or cycles, rhythmic cycles, I think I was calling them. And so we had this review, and we had retrospectives, and it was really, really powerful. And that's how Kanplexity got born. And I realized then that it's suitable also for other areas in non-software. I worked in other businesses afterwards. I got involved with some scientists, and I got involved with some people doing marketing and so on. And I realized that there are similarities, and that maybe this could work for other people as well. So this is Kanplexity. We got a simple image on the screen, but just to remind you who's been saying hello, you got Chris Coombe so far. Thank you, Chris. And Matthew, welcome. Jocko, welcome. Thank you. Andrew, welcome. And Chris as well, as you're in twice. And Hamza is there as well. And we've got Christian as well from Sweden. And we've got David Crow. And we've got Mike Levings. And Ingrid so far. So keep on saying hello to us, and let us know where you are, which part of the world you're in. And thank you so much for joining. So let's get started. So first of all, you know the way we talk about empiricism a lot in agility. We talk about learning, deciding the next thing to do based on the evidence, based on the learnings from what we did last. How do you forget about that piece? Evidence. Do we have some quantitative and qualitative evidence? Hey Aaron, how you doing? Welcome. Thank you. And yeah, we all forget that. Well, we don't all, but a lot of us forget about the evidence. We kind of just shoot from the hip. Let's do this kind of thing. Hi Claudia, how you doing from Luxembourg? I know Claudia. Claudia, how you doing? So being empirical is important, and in Scrum you've got inspect and adapt. In Lean UX you've got sense and respond. In Lean Startup you've got build, measure, learn. If you go way back in the 20th century, you got plan, do, check out, plan, do, study, act. So I was thinking, what would I use in this case? So I thought, well, hi Mihai, I'm presuming you're in Romania today, welcome. I said, well, why not use sense, make, and respond, because isn't Kanban about sense making, and isn't it also about somebody, or hopefully a few of us, being able to read that compass and figure out what's the appropriate response type, and maybe when we should change our response type as well. So I thought this is why I went with sense, make, and respond. Hey Simone, how you doing? Lovely to see you again. Last time I saw you was in Paris. Hope you're well. So yeah, with that, sense, make, and respond is the loop. But the thing is that you don't have to have a loop. We'll get into that later on. You don't actually have to have a cycle, because it's really only people who are kind of in the liminals or complex space that actually need something like that. For a lot of the other areas, we don't necessarily need that. So I'm going to go into that later on in this session. But just to start, we would have a team or a crew, and they don't just focus on delivery. And it's great if you do delivery, by the way, and you validate that you got your value. You should be doing that at a minimum, really. Hi Izmira, welcome from Azerbaijan, one of my favorite places. I love going to Baku, hoping to go there again this year. So yeah, I was thinking, well, you need to validate value. You need to check, because sometimes we deliver stuff and we don't actually check that it made a difference. Sometimes we're actually throwing so much stuff at the wall that we actually don't know, and maybe there's other things that we're doing that's actually causing our market share to go up. Nothing at all to do with the features or projects we're delivering. Maybe we're reducing our prices, and maybe that's why our market share is going up. Nothing at all to do with our initiatives. So we might be misled actually by what we're doing. So you need to validate the value. So is there a measurable change in customer behavior? Can we observe changes in behavior? Can we see some needles moving? And a lot of people forget that we need to discover. We need to discover to deliver, as Ellen Gottesdiener would say, or I would say we need to discover to not deliver. There's lots of reports from the Standish Group, Chaos Report and so on, saying that 2/3 of what we build is rarely or never used. According to Marty Kagan, about a year ago he would have said 70%, now he's saying 80 or 90%. I kind of go along with that. I think a lot of the work that goes through our system, we should never have made it. And a lot of us think that, we need to deliver faster. If we deliver faster, we'll find out sooner if we got the value. But the thing is that we have quality, and so if you're doing Scrum, for example, there's a definition of done. In Kanban, there would be exit criteria on your columns probably to indicate, when is that work finished from that stage going to that stage. And so when people ask me, well, can I move from this column to that column? I say, I don't know. What does your policy say? What does your exit criteria in your column say? And well, then if it's satisfied, then you can move it on. If otherwise, you cannot. And so there's quality when we do our work. We're professional. We do good work, and quality comes at a price. But as Eric Ries used to say, what is quality if you don't know who the customer is? So one of the things I love about discovery is you could do really cheap experiments to find out, are these things even worth building? And the Lean UX people are very good at this. I really like the combination of Scrum and Lean UX, by the way. The Scrum that are provided, really, really good combination, where essentially you have these items in your product backlog, you treat them as problems to be solved, and you elaborate them into various assumptions in terms of outcomes, changes for the business or the organization, who we're targeting, what benefits or outcomes they're looking for, what potential solutions they might have, and what kind of experiments we might run to kind of verify if those assumptions are true or not. And that's a really, really good idea. And using Lean UX is really powerful for discovering a lot of the ideas you should not build. And then, when you combine Scrum and Lean UX, when you validate your assumption, you can then use Scrum, definition of done, that's your quality switch. And you're overcoming the fundamental flaw, in my opinion, of the Lean startup, where crap ends up in production, and prototypes end up in production and stuff like that, because once they validated their assumptions, there tends to be kind of execution bias to continue with what you have, rather than actually maybe stop and say, well, actually maybe we need to do a proper job of this. So discovery is crucial, and it's we talk so often about limiting work in progress or controlling work in progress. It comes for free when you do discovery. You do some discovery, you find out you shouldn't make these things. It's like controlling work in progress. It comes for free. And so in Scrum, for example, you look at the results of your experiment at the sprint review, you look at the increment, you look at the results of the market. It's kind of similar here, except this is aimed at non-software, and there are other considerations that we're going to get into later on in this session. I used to be dismissive about the problem space, thinking it was big design up front, but I interviewed a lot of people from the product management world on the Agility podcast, and I was really struck in particular by a lady named Indy Young, who does a practice of deep listening, where you don't necessarily actually go in with a kind of leading questions. I mean, in fairness, the people who do discovery, they don't ask leading questions. They're very professional, open, powerful questions, all that kind of stuff. But with deep listening, you wouldn't even do that. You might have one initial question, and then you just see where the conversation goes with the customer, because a lot of the time, customers complain about things, but actually, when push comes to shove, they're willing to put up with it. They have a workaround, and they will put up with it. And so they're complaining about it. I call these people happy moaners. They like to moan, but actually they're fine the way things are. They've got a workaround. So understanding the problem space. So a lot of the time when we do discovery, one of the mistakes that we make is we're not actually digging down to understand, is it the right problem to solve? Duh. So we do all this discovery, delivery, we got these goals. Is it the right goal? How do we know? I mean, okay, you can use empiricism to find out, but maybe you can do a little bit of work, maybe on a recurring basis, to actually just check, is this the right problem? Are we actually looking at the right problem right now? So use the Kanban as a compass, and there's a lovely expression in the movie Frozen 2 from Disney, where Anna says we need to do the next right thing, and that's essentially what Kanban helps us to do. It helps us to figure out what is the next right thing to do. So there's a guide. The guide is a steward, an agile leader, a backstage leader. I would say also, if they were working in the complex space, they're leading the exploration. So if you're thinking that the guide is a process coach, that's probably not quite what I'm looking at. I mean, you could have a guide as a process coach, because I'm quite flexible about the guide and who can take that on. But really what I had in mind is the people who actually used this before, and really I had agile leaders who understood Kanban, they understood agility, they were guided maybe by some process coach like someone like myself or whatever, but the key thing was that we didn't kind of over-index on the process at the expense of value. So we found a way forward. We're trying to find the next right thing. And in Kanplexity, we also have a direction of travel. So the direction of travel is, well, that is what it says in the tin. It's where are we going? But we tend to say, well, okay, that's where we think we're going. But actually, we need to learn based on whatever's happening, and we might end up, as Dave Stoughton would say, evolving from the present. We might actually discover that the direction is wrong, In fairness, it's in a lot of other approaches as well. There is a check, even if they use goals, they're using a goal, they're saying, okay, that's fine, but we'll use empiricism to prove if the goal is wrong. Some people forget that, but that is something that's they advise, and that's essentially what we're saying here as well. Use empiricism to learn: are we on the right problem? Are we in the right domain? Is this the right customer? Is it this the right solution? Or kind of questioning everything pretty much. So this is this kind of a summary on this screen of what Kanplexity is all about. It's sitting on top of Kanban guide. Kanplexity does not re-explain Kanban because we already have Kanban guide. We don't need to explain Kanban again. It's already there. And so we advise you to look at Kanban guide. We'll have a quick look at it in a minute in terms of what's in there. But essentially, we're assuming you're already doing Kanban, and then what you were doing is you're trying to amp up your game so you can better deal with complexity. Now, I did write a blog post, I think it was about a year ago, about how Kanban can help people to deal with complexity. And Kanban, without complexity, can help you to deal with complexity. It can. The signaling is really, really good. You get more signals about what's going on. It's just that Cynefin followers would argue that it doesn't fully deal with complexity. So that's what I'm trying to address in this guide. I'm not trying to convince you that Cynefin is the right thing. If you don't believe in Cynefin, that's fine. You can join if you want, and that's okay. That's cool. But if you do think it's a good model and it seems to be fairly established, framework I should call it. Actually, I'll be slapped for that by Dave. If you do think it's a good thing to follow, then we advise you to maybe think about Kanplexity. So I'll just pause there for a moment to see if anybody else wants to say hello. Please leave a comment, say which part of the world you're in today, and if you have any questions so far as well in terms of, okay, what's John talking about? I'm obviously going to explain more, but if you have any questions, feel free to just submit them. I'll see them here and I'll flash them up on screen and try to address them as best we can. So Jocko has already asked a question actually that I didn't spot. So can I briefly describe what we mean by complexity? I will get to that later on, but for now, let's just say, let me give you an oversimplification for now, Jocko. It's stuff that we haven't figured out. But the stuff that we haven't figured it out, but even if the experts got together, they still wouldn't figure it out the first time. They'd have to kind of loop around a few times to figure it out. You might need some fresh thinking to figure it out. But actually, I didn't quite answer your question because I answered what is complex and you asked what is complexity. There's different levels of complexity which we'll kind of cover during this session. So please come back to me again if I don't answer that properly, Jocko. Okay, so let's have a look at what's in Kanplexity, right? So we have, if I just jump back here a little bit, we have Kanban guide. And in Kanban guide, we describe 3 practices and 4 measures. And the first practice is define your workflow. You could actually have more than one workflow on your Kanban board. I'm not sure if we were explicit enough about that, but you could have more than one workflow on your Kanban board. Second practice is actively managing items in progress, and that essentially means, like in this case here, you can see there's a board and there's 2 items with alarm clocks on them, but the alarm clocks are kind of going off because these items are very late. For those kind of items, they should have been kind of out of those columns long ago. And you can see there's like a little tint of red around the post-it as well. And you can see other ones are marked green. They're kind of aging okay, but the ones with the alarm clock, they really are quite old. And one of them is blocked, so we probably need to put some energy into unblocking that. And there's another one, it might not be blocked, but there's some other reason. There's something, it could be blocked, maybe we need to declare it as blocked, but there's something else going on that's causing it to take longer than usual, so we need to pay a lot of attention to that. And so there's 4 measures as well, and one of them is cycle time. How long does it take an item to get from one point to another, and the starting point to the finish point. And if I just tick off the banner actually just to show you a little bit more. So what you can actually do as well is you can see there's like little stopwatch timers. So the start of the stopwatch is between the first black border to the green border between the first two columns, to the border, the black border to the green border in the last two columns. So, and they've got a kind of a stopwatch there, and in this case they've actually got three. You can only see two in the view here, but you can have any number of cycle times on your workflow. But they've communicated a service level expectation on the workflow of 85% in 15 days or less. In other words, for the work that they had in the past, 85% of those items took 15 days or less. So if you had a single item, single unstarted item, the idea is that by and large it would take 15 days or less. But there's a bit more to it than that, because if you pick up an elephant, you're not going to get that done in 15 days. So we'd say, well, does this feel like one of these items that we normally get done in 15 days or less? So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, actually, and that's called right sizing. And so we actively manage work items in progress. You finish items, you unblock items, you get items moved, you make sure the system isn't starving, you make sure the system isn't overwhelmed, and you try to optimize your flow, you try to stabilize your cycle times, maybe even get your cycle times to come down, and hopefully you get your throughput to increase. And it's not unusual for me to see teams having their cycle times and doubling their throughput with a decent amount of attention to flow, basically paying attention to their capacity, which it's a bit noisier than what I'm just about to explain, but often I would say to people over a quarter, your throughput is your capacity. It's not as simple as that. There's a lot of noise in the system, but if you were finishing, 24 projects in a quarter, like, why are you bringing in 48? You know what I mean? So we try to kind of operate. It's much more sensitive than context is king, but we try to keep an eye on our throughput, and we can also take on opportunities as well to increase our throughput by sometimes, if we see the system is starving, that might be a great day to put more work in the system to see can we increase our capacity and see what happens. So Kanban guide already explains this. What a lot of people forget about is the third practice, which is reviewing and improving your workflow, so that do you have the right columns? Do we need swim lanes? I don't like swim lanes, actually. Do we need to change our WIP limits? Do we need to change our policies? All these kinds of things. And do we need to expand the workflow downstream? Do we need to expand it upstream? How are we working with other teams? Do we need another board with that team? And all these things happen, and these are good things to do in Kanban. Really, really good things to do. So if we move on then to complexity, which is what Jocko was asking about, I'll show you the Kanban diagram later on, but I made a deliberate attempt to try to make Kanban more accessible to people who aren't familiar with Kanban. So it was really tricky, but I tried to find language that didn't break Kanban, but I was trying to describe it in slightly different ways that were kind of a bit more digestible for people. Like, for example, in the clear space, where you basically know what to do, you can follow some recipes and the work is fairly predictable. It's kind of like tic-tac-toe, or noughts and crosses as we called it in Ireland. The weather metaphor there is it's sunny, and the material metaphor would be it's a solid object. And then in the ordered domain, we also have complicated work where you might actually need to be flexible about how we do the work. We might have better ways. When I met Magda downstairs here, I opened a recipe book to do a dish, and I probably wouldn't be with her today if I stuck to the recipe book, because she had a better way. So I needed to be flexible about the how, because I still have very low expertise in cooking, actually, but we might have better ways, and this is where the experts work together. The game metaphor would be chess. The material metaphor would be a block of ice, fairly solid. Weather, maybe kind of cloudy, but the sunshine's trying to break through, and we can do this with a lot of people. The work is still fairly predictable in the complicated space. Then there's a kind of a border between complicated and complex, and The weather metaphors there is like it's cloudy without sun. The ice is starting to melt a little bit. You got the house of bricks and the house of sticks kind of thing. And in this space here, we're maybe trying to move some work that from exploration to exploitation. There's some work, we've run some experiments out. We figured some stuff out. There's still some stuff we haven't completely figured out. So we need to do some kind of cycles. And Scrum is really good in this space actually in terms of helping us to kind of convert exploration work into work that we can exploit, and you iterate in that space in the liminal, and it's where it's kind of a thick border, if you like, in between complicated and complex. In complex, even if the experts get together, they might not figure it out. You might need to bring fresh thinking in. I think in BMW they got a sailboat designer in, and that's how they got the X6, X4, X8 and the GT series, I believe. I'm not sure if that's true. So they had fresh thinking from sailboat design in BMW. There are lots of other stories out there where people twisted old ideas. I was watching a show about COVID last night and Boris Johnson in intensive care, and as I suspected, what they did was they twisted the CPAP mask, which is normally for people with obstructive sleep apnea, blows air down their throat to keep their throat open during the night so they don't stop breathing. They injected oxygen into the side of that. That was a twist. That's called an exaptation, but twisting an old idea, twisting an idea that was for a different purpose. Even mRNA, that was originally designed for HIV, wasn't it? And then they were fiddling around with it for the common cold. And then someone said, well, why don't we try this idea for COVID? And luckily that worked. And in the complex space, you're looking for emergence, and then when something emerges, you try to capture it. And the material metaphor would be liquid, and weather would be it's raining, it's a bit of a tangle, and the game metaphor would be it's like poker. You can apply a certain amount of skill and so on, but as such, the work is not comparable to work you did before. So having a Gantt chart to say we'll have all the work done by Christmas, boss, isn't very smart when the work is in the complex space. How do you know you're in the complex space? When the experts get together and they still can't figure it out. They're spinning their wheels. Actually, sometimes what can happen is you can get what we call analysis paralysis. The experts can't figure out what to do, and you could even in the complex space you could even run experiments actually in the complicated space to figure out which is the right idea, but that's more of a sweet spot for the complex space. Okay, and then in chaos, there's a border of chaos, the liminal again between complex and chaotic. And there's a piece as well at the top of chaotic, which I consider to be positive chaos. So not all chaos is bad. And actually, this is where you kind of release the shackles a little bit, and you kind of let people free, and maybe you let some team, I don't know, innovate for 1 week per month or 2 weeks per month or something like that. And but if you're in the liminal, you might only say, well, let's do a hackathon once a quarter, something like that. Or you could have an incubator. You could have an incubator where you have people in a separate building, and they're kind of away from the culture of the rest of the organization, and it's helping them to free their thinking. And there you have more radical repurposing, and this is actually where I think a lot of invention happens, in positive chaos and the liminal between chaotic and complex. A lot of things that we discover are by accident. The headphones that I have here, the Bose headphones, I spoke with John Carter a few months ago, and he ended up being the chief engineer at Bose, and now he's a product marketing executive. And he told me that when they were looking for noise cancellation, they weren't actually looking for noise cancellation. They were looking to improve the fidelity of their sound. And they were very smart. They bought what we equivalent of a record store when there was vinyl and CDs and all that kind of stuff, and DVDs. I think you still buy DVDs, can't you? But anyway, he was. They put the headphones down, and they didn't even say a special sign. Look at these, try this new thing. They just wanted to see, kind of like where Andy Young was going, just to see what people do. And they picked them up, and then they were just observing how they were reacting to it. And they discovered noise cancellation by accident. They weren't trying to improve the fidelity of the sound. They were not trying to find noise cancellation. That was a side effect. And so that was something that by accident. Penicillin was found by accident as well, wasn't it? So lots of these inventions, and I think a lot of the invention at Google as well was during the 20% time before they started applying portfolio management on their innovation time. I think you kill your innovation when you put portfolio management on top of it to kind of control the innovation. That's where it kind of goes a bit pear-shaped, in my opinion, my humble opinion. You can also see as well some recommendations that came from the EU field guide on dealing with complexity in a crisis about how many people should you have in these different spaces. So you could have a unit size more than 150 people if it's predictable work. I won't get into the Dunbar number for now. And the unit size less than 150 for complicated work. But actually when it's complex, you need a small amount of people, less than 15 people. And when you get into negative chaos in particular, maybe less than 5 people. So this is interesting. When I was watching the show on what happened about COVID in the UK, it was interesting. There was a character of Dominic Cummings, the guy who was acting as him, was complaining that they needed a kind of a micro cabinet, and he was spot on actually, because what you need is less people, in my opinion, less people to react and decide what we're going to do next, that kind of thing. So that's an unofficial and unauthorized representation of Cynefin. In the middle, there's aporia, which is creating deliberate confusion or confused. Confused as in you don't know which one of these spaces you're in, so you just do what you always did, and you're not really sensitive to how you should react. And then aporia, which is where it's kind of like, oh, are we actually in the right problem here? And is this the right and I have an opinion on this. Dave didn't agree with me when I mentioned this to him, but when Omicron arrived in the UK in December 2021, I think it was December 2021, the scientists in the complicated space didn't know how to react. The research scientists trying to figure out whether the vaccine and the vaccine boosters would work on Omicron would need 6 weeks to do the research. So he couldn't wait, and so in my opinion he went operatic and went into chaos and did something, and he basically asked a lot of people in the UK to get the booster. We'll find out in good time whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, but the UK economy was the first one to come out of COVID. Whether we'll have other problems as a result, I have no idea, but that, I think that for me, I don't know whether that's right, but if that was true, that would be an example of aporia where you're kind of saying, okay, what's the right course of action here? Which domain should we go into? And so the another thing as well I just want to mention is it's important not to oversimplify the framework, because you might think we're working on something complicated, but maybe there's some part of what you're doing is actually complex, and there's some part that's actually chaotic. So there might be different aspects of your problem that are like COVID, for example, hand washing in clear, scientists reporting the numbers in complicated, the mRNA adaptation was in complex, and I think there's research for the antiviral drugs. I think that would have been kind of deeply complex, or maybe even bordering on the liminal between complex and chaotic. But that's just my own personal opinion. I'm not an arbiter of the truth. I'm not the expert on Cynefin here, but this would be my kind of understanding. So why is that relevant? Well, depending on which space you're in, maybe you can react differently. Now, there's lots of different response types, and in the guide we actually explain what way we expect you to respond. Context is king, and you can adapt the framework. The guys actually, I shouldn't call it a framework. You can adapt to how you react based on whatever the situation is. But all things being equal, if the work is clear, you don't need a stand-up, you don't need a retrospective, you just need replenishment. If you're in the complicated space, yeah, you do need to replenishment. You kind of need replenishment on all domains. You need to bring work in, right, when at the right time, if the capacity allows. I went with the word stand-up because I'm not sure if people use dailies. Sorry, some people who might be offended by that. I was trying to find the right word, and check in and all these. The word stand up is out there, so I just went with that because the expectation is if you're in the complex space, you might do that daily or quasi daily. The stand up might not be daily in the complicated space. It would be whatever would be deemed appropriate for the people or whatever context they're working in. But a retrospective would be sensible. I think it's sensible to do retrospectives in the complicated space and definitely in the complex space. In the complex space, I've added in a cycle. And the key thing here is that the cycle doesn't have to be under 30 days. I actually said it can be 1 to a number of weeks. That number of weeks can be more than 4 weeks. Because when you start out, your cycle times might be quite long actually. And what I prefer is in Kanban, for example, we have work items, and the work items need to be valuable. And what some people do is they keep on breaking down the items so that they fit within a time period. That's fine. But if the work items have been broken down so much that now they don't show value anymore when you deliver them, you're not optimizing the flow of value anymore, you're optimizing the flow of activities. So my personal preference is if your item takes 6 weeks to finish, 6 week cycle is fine. And it's not like, everything has to be done at the end of 6 weeks, but what's the appropriate period for looking in to see, well, do we have that work done? Can we get our customers to look at and play with what we've done, and can we show them results of our experiments as well? So the idea of a review and a cycle would be introduced when you're in the complex space. In the positive chaos area, I'm saying you don't necessarily need a cycle, but you probably could do it a review. And how often you do that review is up to you. You just need to be careful about execution bias. David Marquet, he wrote a lovely book called Leadership as Language, and he talks about the blue work and the red work. The red work is where we do the work, we re-execute. And the blue work is we step back to reflect. And what's really nice about having these interactions is that it gives you an opportunity to step back and reflect on, are we doing the right thing? Is this the right problem? Is this the right customer? Is this the right solution for that? All these, are we in the right domain? All these it gives us opportunities to kind of check in about where, what are we really doing here? What I've noticed is that most humans that I've interacted with, and I did an experiment with at a university with over 200 people earlier this year. They were using Lean UX, which I love. I was teaching them Lean UX actually, and it was really interesting when people's experiments were not giving them the validation that they needed to prove that their assumptions were correct. If they were humble, if they were agile in their behavior, they would be saying, "Hang on a second, the data is telling us something different here. Do we need to try something else?" Instead, they were persevering with something that should have just been put down actually as an idea. It's a bad idea. And I saw some teams that collapsed their team and they joined some other teams, and that was really a good sign of humility. When you do discovery, humility gets handed to you, and you need to be able for that. And so I would recommend that. But in negative chaos replenishment, it's like just do something, but just try to make sure you're not making things worse. So feel free to keep on asking questions as well. If anybody wants to say where they're from as well, I'll be delighted to hear, see where you're coming in from today. So we're going through Kanplexity, and we've just talked about Kanban so far, and you can see the URLs as well at the bottom: kanbanguys.org, exegery.com, and orderlydisruption.com. And all those 3 locations, you'll find Kanplexity. It's not so obvious in Kanban guides because I didn't want people to be so confused between Kanban guide and thinking, do you have to do Kanplexity? No, you don't. It's optional. You can you don't have to use it if you don't want to. If you're skilled in other ways of dealing with complexity and you feel you don't need like something complexity, that's absolutely fine. But for people who feel they need a bit of guidance, it's there, and it's called optional Kanplexity guide under the Kanban guide menu. Drop down, and you'll think I might move it to the more menu to reduce confusion. I have to figure that out with Daniel, what we're going to do about that. So anyway, so we've talked about events, and if I was to visualize them, you would have the cycle, which is essentially the kind of a rhythmic cycle, if you like. It's why are we doing this, the direction of travel, what are we doing and how are we doing it, and there's a rhythm. The important thing for dealing with complex work is you have rhythm. It is possible to deal with complex work without rhythm, but you need a lot of discipline. What you'll notice actually in Kanplexity as well is there's very few rules in it. It's mostly recommendations. I think I would say to you need a guide, you need a team or a crew. They're kind of essential, I would say, but a lot of the other stuff is recommended. Replenishment, just-in-time intake of right-sized work when capacity allows. The stand-up is deciding the next right thing and having a look at flow. I give guidance as well for each of these interactions. And the review, the why, the what, the next right thing, learnings from experiments, value validation, looking at market insights, and maybe testing if the direction of travel is okay. And the retrospective, looking at how we're working, how effective we are, the dynamics, and maybe looking at our workflow and flow as well. Okay, David, you have to head off. Thank you so much. The same link will do for the recording, so thank you for joining. Okay, so someone said to me at the weekend, because I put out another version of the guide on Friday, the 30th of September, the anniversary of my deceased parents, and kind of a special day for me, and so I put it out on that day. But I got some very good feedback because I was putting loads of effort into editing of the text, but not so good at editing the images. So yeah, I got some feedback over the weekend, and so I thanked the reviewers in the guide as well, who were involved over the weekend to give me really deep feedback. And yeah, so I reworked the images, but one person told me that actually if you put the Kanban diagram in there and put the interactions on top, I would have got it straight away. The reason I didn't put the Kanban diagram in earlier in the guide is because I didn't want people to have to understand Kanban, like what is a constraint and what does sense categorize respond mean, what does probe sense respond mean. I didn't want to be trying to decode language so much, and Kanban's already explained in Kanban.io. There's a wiki there, and I linked to that as well, and there's attribution and so on. You can see I've added my weather metaphors. I hope Dave doesn't mind the graffiti of the extra stuff, but I've been clear hopefully in terms of what I've added to the diagram and what's not part of Kanban. But this kind of will help you, give you some guidance in terms of what's needed. And it's kind of interesting that Scrum has similar interactions, isn't it, in the liminal and the complex, and whereas Kanplexity is saying, well, actually if you're in the complicated space, you don't need to have all of those events, and similar in positive chaos as well, even in negative chaos. So I'm not going to be explaining Kanban on this call much more, but that it was added to the end of the guide for people who are actually skilled. The guide is actually aimed at people who are not so up to speed on Kanban. In so much as I could, and near as I could get to layperson's language, explaining what you might need to do, what each of these spaces mean, how you might need to react, without going into overly technical words, but at the same time, without breaking Kanban, without losing the message. And so I had to be really careful with the words, and I hope I did an okay job. And I hope I've demonstrated my agility already I already updated the guide. It was updated last night, so thanks to the reviewers over the weekend. So if there are any things that need to be changed, we will change them, of course. I also put in some guidance as well at the back of the guide, the appendix. I didn't put in this visual, but essentially most teams are not part. They're just not delivering on their own. They're delivering as part of an entire ecosystem. There might be a whole product group. There might be a massive project. There might be you might be multiple departments hanging together, that type of thing, trying to go across the value stream, or the flight levels. People say you might have flight routes going across a number of different levels, strategy to coordination down to doing the work and back up again, different routes and so on. And so there's lots of guidance in the guide on that, in terms of favor, try, avoid. Which patterns should you favor? Which ones could you try? And the ones that you could try, by the way, are really, really good. It's just that they're designed for Scrum. So I thought, it'd be a bit cheeky for me to say favor them if they're designed for Scrum and talk about using them for Kanban. And yes, Mike, would I like comments in the guide moving forward? Absolutely. Keep feeding them through, and I listen. And so yeah, if there's something that you think doesn't sit quite right, absolutely. Probably won't be changing it every single week like I did this weekend, but I will try to be very adaptive in terms of doing updates. So yeah, this is Kanplexity. It's a very simple guide. The essential message is sense, make, and respond. In the guide itself, you will see a page that describes what I expect of a guide, and you'll notice as well messaging as well about executive agility, because there's lots of approaches out there, and thou shalt do this and thou shalt do that, and everything will be great, and no, everything won't be great. Pia Maria Thorian said to me, she on a call with me, she pretended there was a flower pot in her hand. She said, "Grow, flower, grow." The flower obviously isn't going to grow, right? You need to create the environment in which the flower can grow. And Klaus Leopold says, agility is not a team sport. He's spot on. It's an organizational sport, and so lots of things need to be unlocked for the team. So when leaders put pressure on teams to deliver faster and so on, we all need to play at that game. We as leaders as well need to be creating an environment in which agility can grow. So I talk about that under the guide section, but I also talk about it in the appendix under organizational agility. Essentially, the guide is essentially a steward, a backstage leader, or an agile leader. I think the Less community do a lovely job of explaining management and essentially doing go see and fixing problems and all that kind of stuff. I'm flexible about who the guy could be. It could be a change agent, a coach, a mentor, a teacher, facilitator, service leader, product manager, leader, executive, even a team member or a crew member, because some organizations don't have management. A lot of my clients recently actually don't have management layers. But what do I expect? That the guide is careful to avoid too much focus on the process at the expense of value. Be careful when you notice that people think that you're kind of putting them in, you're shoehorning them into a process, and they don't quite get why you're bringing them down this route. So, invitation over imposition, and try to promote value validation over outputs. Try to steward the everyone really towards continual improvement, and most importantly, fix issues that are beyond the control or influence of the teams or the crews. I give some examples of what perspectives maybe the guide needs to have. From a people perspective, for example, maybe you need to demonstrate compassion, trust the team, and foster healthy conflict, and regularly go see and try to use inspired facilitation techniques. But also maybe you can look at, can we have horizontal career paths? There's a book from 70s or 80s, I think. Actually, that reference is 2004, but skills-based pay has been around for like decades. They figured it out in manufacturing long ago. Okay, we don't want to be doing things from manufacturing and knowledge work, but there are some things that we could apply from that space, and I'm sure with a bit of creative thinking we could figure it out. Also, maybe arranging for funding that supports the work. Can we have more regular funding? Can we get away from annual budgets? Can we embrace beyond budgeting, for example? And instead of managing expectations about dates, can we try to manage expectations about uncertainty? Learning is crucial. It's not just about value validation. I've also been inspired as well by the Vanguard method, in that what they do is, one of the things that they do is they get you to witness interactions with the customer. You might have all these beautiful dashboards saying everything's wonderful, but actually things aren't so wonderful. And if you just put on your headphones to listen to calls in call centers, you might actually see that, you might hear that. And lots of other things, ranging space for Slack and all that type of stuff as well. So that's the guide. I also put a bit of effort into explaining what a team does. Kind of obvious, isn't it, what a team does? I mean, but it's not so obvious, because actually a group of people isn't a team. Kanban guide just requires you to have Kanban system members, people with a pulse, and whereas Kanplexity, because trust is needed when you're dealing with complexity. When you're dealing with in the complex space. Jocko, I hope I answered your question. Come back to me if I haven't. The team does the work. In the face of complexity, they're small, not too small though. Small, diverse. When I say diverse, diversity and inclusion, but also cognitive diversity. We can have diversity and inclusion and still have groupthink. So we're looking for cognitive diversity as well. They're self-managing, they're cross-skilled, and they're willing to learn each other's work. They give trust, they reward, and they earn it. But executives need to cultivate an environment where the team is ready, willing, and able for work in the problem space, discovery, delivery, and value validation. Also put a bit of effort as well into explaining, my trackpad has gone there, but explaining what a crew is. So if I look at crew, essentially, yeah, so if I go to crew now, airline pilots are a good example of people who are in crews. They do the work, and in the face of complexity, they're still diverse, hopefully, and cross-skilled. Trust is a byproduct of their intensive training, because they've been intensively trained. And by the way, one of the things that they get trained on as well is teaming, I believe. So how well can you team? By the way, I have a section on projects as well on the guide, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. So still though, executives need to cultivate an environment where they're ready, willing, and able to deal with the problem space, discovery, delivery, and value validation. I also have a section on projects, multi-team crew patterns. Here you can see what I favor, what I say you should try, what maybe you could avoid. But I talk about projects because the people in the projects world, they be kind of, they haven't been getting much love really, have they, from agile people. Kanban, of course, you can use Kanban for projects. I am nervous about projects. I used to be a project manager myself for quite a long time before I went into the agile space, and I do have a few concerns. And one of the concerns would be that well, sometimes we forget to validate value. We build a business case. I did this myself actually. We build a business case with all the value, blah blah blah, and then it just becomes about the time, the cost and the scope and so on. And okay, I wasn't really like that. I was probably a terrible project manager. I was saying, bringing change. I was saying life changes, business changes. Bring the change in. It's fine. I'll find something to swap out. I'll only get a change request if I need more money or something like that. That's the way I was operating towards the end of my project management days. And we did validate value, to be fair, but I did have some projects earlier on where I didn't. I wouldn't say I was doing this, but I noticed a lot of my peers were claiming that they delivered something that was worth $20 million, and no one checked actually. They might be minus $10 million. We might have made things worse actually. So that's the point about failure demand. Failure to do something right for the customer. Sometimes we make things worse. Right? So be careful about that. Now, there are some very good project managers out there. There are some very good projects, and people are authentic about agility. But what I've noticed is, with the best will in the world, if you're working on a short or medium term project, you're really not going to have the appetite to fix organizational problems, even if they help your project, because they're so big that the project might be over by the time you fix them. So that's a bit of a deterrent for me. Also, the Oxford Review had a look at the Tuckman model. You might have heard of forming, storming, norming, performing, and they didn't say that the model was valid, but they said it's not invalid. All models are wrong, some are useful, and in context it might be valid, but I've found it to be useful, and I've seen teams that can take as much as a couple of months to figure out what approach they're using. So even with Kanplexity, I'm saying, when you put it in, well, you start, if you start a new team, well, it's going to take you a while. You're going to have the honeymoon period, and then you might have a little bit of friction. You should have a bit of friction, hopefully healthy friction. If you don't, by the way, you don't actually improve as a team. It's called punctured equilibrium. You need to keep on having little bits of tension to kind of help you to improve to the next stage. But there's another model known as the change curve, or the J curve. And apparently when you do a change, things get worse. Some people would say, well, when you go into a situation, well, you can only make things better. And actually for 8 years I got away with that. I went into situations where things can only get better, but actually things can always get worse. And there was a team I came across in 2010, and they were very good at waterfall. They could actually release every 3 months. They were very good at it. And they actually got worse when they went to an approach that I helped them with. Well, for 2 months they got worse, and then they started panicking, and I didn't prepare them for the things getting worse. by the time you figure out all these things. Now, some teams are better at teaming, so they'll get up to speed much more quickly, and the J curve will be shorter, and you can have smaller J curves and so on. But all these, all these dangers for projects. You got organizational impediments, the Tuckman model, the change curve, and also I would say that it can lead to the delusion as well that when people set up a dedicated complexity team for a project, it could lead to the delusion that all we need to do is just add more teams because we've unlimited capacity to do more projects. And you know what? Maybe we're all depending on 2 or 3 people at the back of the building somewhere, and we can only go as fast as them. So performance actually doesn't keep going up; it actually plateaus and actually comes down. So yeah, lots in the guide. That's kind of it really. That is Kanplexity. I hope you liked it, and now I'll try to take some of your questions. So feel free to give me some of your messages and your questions. I'd be delighted to take them. Sense, make, and respond. So Kanplexity is an expansion pack for Kanban, and a Kanban starter pack for agility underpinned by Kanban. That is how I describe it. I hope you like it. I hope you find some use case for something like Kanplexity. I will be developing a class for this to help people understand it. There'll probably also be some online learning for it as well. But it's really as straightforward as it is in the guide. I hope you find it useful. I hope it's digestible and that it makes sense to you. If it doesn't, please give me some feedback. And I just realized I missed a message from Ulysses. Sorry, Ulysses. Greetings from Panama indeed. We've got 2 people, I believe, in South America. We've got Ingrid and yourself. You're very welcome, Ulysses, and sorry I missed your message earlier on. So yeah, this is question time. Any questions or comments? Disagreements? You might think this is a lot of rubbish. You want to tell me it's rubbish. That's fine. It's a free world, right? So you don't have to use this if you don't want to. It's an option. But yeah, really would welcome your comments at this point. If you want to find out more about Kanplexity, you can go to kanbanguys.org/Kanplexity guide, or you can go to xagility.com/Kanplexity. You can also find it on orderlydisruption.com. It's available in both HTML and PDF format. The best version at the moment is the PDF version, because the PDF version also includes all the references. There's lots of links in there, so when I refer to some topics, if it's an online resource, I have the hyperlink there, so you can find the hyperlink directly from the document, but you can also find it from the references, and there's lots of books referenced from it as well. Okay, I don't see any other comments from anyone, so I'm just going to give people another minute or so, and if no one has comments, we'll close it up for today. I want to thank everyone who's been here for joining me at different times on this call. It's the same link, I believe, works with the recording, so if you joined late, you should be able to watch the recording, and if you have to nip off early as well, you should be able to do that. Okay, I don't see any other questions from anyone, so I want to wish you all a very good evening and wish you the best of luck with it. And if you have any questions, just reach out to me on social media, and I'll be delighted to answer your questions. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Matthew. A question from Matthew. What mechanism do you have other than trust with regards to continuity when there's a complete crew change in maintaining the systems, a system not perhaps like a flight crew, but a crew on, say, a rig, where you have shifts of complete change? Even in that case as well, I would say, Matthew, people on oil rigs, I believe they're trained on how to team. And yeah, I don't see it as a huge issue, but if you think actually your crew isn't really a crew, it's really a team, then yeah, you might need to do some teaming skills actually to try and figure out how do we actually become a team quicker, how do we go through those tuck them in phases much quicker? Can we do it in a few minutes, or a few hours, rather than a few days or weeks or months? I hope that helps, Matthew. Thank you, Claudio. Thank you, Christian. And thank you, Sergej. Thank you so much. Hope you like it. And I think that's it. I don't have any more comments, so I want to thank you all very much, and I wish you a lovely rest of your week. And let me know how you get on with Kanplexity. Over now. Thank you. Bye bye.